A new round of Gaza ceasefire talks begin in Qatar.
We must bring this process to a close. We need to see the hostages released, relief for Palestinian civilians in Gaza, security for Israel, and lower tensions in the region.
Plus, protests sweep across India over the rape and murder of a doctor in training.
Over 8,000 government doctors joined the strikes in the western Maharashtra state, halting all hospital departments except emergency services. Doctors held posters calling for justice for the victim.
And the new global health emergency, what we know about the Mpox virus. Today is Thursday, August 15th, and this is VOA's Flashpoint. Good evening, I'm Lori London. International mediators held a new round of talks Thursday aimed at halting the Israel-Hamas war and securing the release of hostages, with the potential deal seen as the best hope of heading off an even larger regional conflict. White House National Security spokesman John Kirby.
Talks are moving forward today in Doha. President Biden directed Director Burns and Brett McGurk to participate for the United States. They're on the ground right now working with representatives from Israel, Qatar, and Egypt. Qatar and Egypt are in turn mediating with Hamas.
Speaking to reporters on Thursday, Kirby said while there is a sense of urgency, it is still a process.
The resumption of these talks is an important step. And in the lead up to this meeting, we'd already narrowed some gaps. Today, we are focused on the details of the implementation of the agreement. There remains a lot of work to do, given the complexity of the agreement. We do not anticipate coming out of these talks today with a deal. In fact, I'd expect the talks to continue into tomorrow.
The renewed ceasefire talks come as the Palestinian Health Ministry said 40,000 Gazans have been killed since the start of the war. VOA White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara filed this report ahead of the renewed talks.
Gazans bid farewell to loved ones killed in Israeli strikes that have continued since the October 7th terror attack carried out by Hamas, even as the United States and countries in the region push for a ceasefire. Talks are scheduled Thursday in Doha, the capital of Qatar. Hamas, a U.S.-designated terror group, is signaling it will not attend. Hamas political officer Osama Hamdan said the group expects to be told by the mediators that Israel has accepted what is being offered, and any meeting should be based on talking about implementation mechanisms and setting deadlines, rather than negotiating something new. On Wednesday, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre projected confidence that talks will happen.
There's always a lot of public posturing in advance. We've seen that before. It's not new.
But President Joe Biden has admitted peace is elusive.
It's getting hard. We'll see what Iran does, and we'll see what happens if there's any attack. But I'm not giving up.
An Iranian attack on Israel is feared after the recent killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh on Iranian soil. Israel did not claim responsibility for the killing, but is widely blamed for the attack. The U.S. has deployed additional military assets to the region as deterrence against Iran and its other proxies, including Hezbollah. The group has intensified cross-border fire on Israel from Lebanon. Biden's envoy, Amos Hochstein, was in Beirut Wednesday.
There is no more time to waste, and there's no more valid excuses from any party for any further delay.
The warring parties blame each other for the deadlock. Israeli spokesman David Mencer.
It is Hamas that continues to set additional terms and has refused to reach an agreement.
Many are urging Biden to do more to pressure Israel. Laura Blumenfeld, senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies, via Zoom.
If he says to Netanyahu, game over, what's coming down the pipe, whether it's President Harris or President Trump, there isn't going to be the same kind of long leash for you. So it's time to kind of wrap it up and bring about a new era.
That new era is regional integration for Israel in return for Palestinian statehood. But that is way down the line. A ceasefire in Gaza remains the elusive first step. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
एक समाज के नाते हमें गंभीरता से सोचना होगा.
In his address at Independence Day celebrations in New Delhi on Thursday, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi called for strict punishment for crimes against women. The comments come as outrage and protests over the gruesome rape and murder of a doctor last week continued to escalate. Fiona Jones with Reuters has this report.
More Indian hospitals were disrupted as doctors continued nationwide protests against the alleged rape and murder of a trainee doctor in Kolkata. Authorities and the media say demonstrations for the deceased 31-year-old gained further momentum from the previous day. Thousands of patients were left without care across the country. Kolkata state officials said emergency services remained suspended in almost all of their government-run hospitals. And over 8,000 government doctors joined the strikes in the western Maharashtra state, halting all hospital departments except emergency services. Doctors held posters calling for justice for the victim, with some medics like Dr. Ranganathan Dixit in New Delhi calling for the Central Bureau of Investigation to act.
We want a fair inquiry and demand CBI intervention. We are demanding strict action against authorities who try to conceal evidence related to the case, and the resignation of the college principal.
Doctors in India's crowded and often squalid government hospitals say they are overworked and underpaid, and sometimes bear the brunt of violence by those angry at inadequate medical services. Medics maintain their workplace environment is unsafe, even after the weekend arrest of a police volunteer in Kolkata for the doctor's murder. A Health Ministry spokesperson did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Protesting Dr. Abdul Wakim Khan.
The principal of the college, who made reckless statements about the incident, was merely transferred out of the college. We're demanding his termination, not transfer. We're also demanding the death penalty for the criminal caught in the case.
A Kolkata police chief told reporters a case had been registered against the suspect relating to rape and murder. And the region's chief minister said she'd given state police a deadline of Sunday to finish their investigation. If not, she'd hand it to federal agencies.
That was Fiona Jones with Reuters reporting. In neighboring Bangladesh, as cases rise against her, including murder accusations, the government could decide to ask India to extradite former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, that from the country's de facto foreign minister, Mohammed Tawheed Hossain, who spoke with Reuters on Thursday.
The question comes that since there are so many cases, there could be, again, some speculating, I am not the person right to answer this. If there is a request from there, we have to ask for her, a return to Bangladesh, if there is a demand from there. And that creates an embarrassing situation for the Indian government. So I think Indian government knows this, and I'm sure they will take care of it.
Hasina fled Bangladesh for India on August 5th after a violent uprising against her led to nearly 300 deaths, including that of many students. She has been named in at least 2 murder cases. As Ukrainian forces continue their push deeper into Russia, questions are emerging on what Kyiv plans to do with the territory that Ukraine is capturing. We hear more from Anna Chernikova in Kyiv.
For people in Sumy, just 30 kilometers from Ukraine's border with Russia, there are signs of the war all around. For Svetlana and others here, Ukraine's capture of Russian territory in the Kursk region, just a short distance over the border, was a surprise and a sign that war may be a step closer to ending.
After all, this war must be ended somehow, because since they are shooting in one direction, it is not right. It is not a war when it is one-sided. It is necessary to respond so that it ends sooner.
Sumy was one of the first Ukrainian cities to face the Russian assault in 2022. 2 years later, it is a springboard for Ukraine's surprise incursion into Russia. Residents say Russian shell attacks have become louder and more intense in the past week, since Ukraine began its offensive operation into Russia's Kursk region.
I think, yes, the situation has escalated. They also respond. They are furious.
Officials claim Ukraine's aim is not to permanently seize Russian territory. President Volodymyr Zelensky says it's about protecting the lives of Ukrainian people and ending the war.
The more Russian military presence is destroyed in the border areas, the closer peace will be for our state and true security.
Security analysts see the move as a way for Ukraine to draw Russian troops away from the front lines, and they see the captured land as a bargaining chip in potential peace negotiations.
Like President Biden stated, strategic dilemma to Russia, to Putin. Why? Because now Putin has a choice. What he gonna do? He will protect his own territory of Russia, Kursk Oblast, or he will continue offensive operation on the Donbas, on the eastern front line of Ukraine.
He says Ukraine is also exposing Russia's weaknesses.
We show that all around the world you don't need to be afraid Russians, and you need to permit Ukraine to use long-range missile against Russian military objects on their territory.
In Ukraine, all eyes are on the surprise developments in Kursk, how far Kyiv may get or how much control it will maintain. Still, capturing Russian territory has ignited hope in Ukraine that the end of the war is within reach and that the outcome could be in Ukraine's favor. Anna Chernikova, VOA News, Kyiv.
Meanwhile, Britain's Ministry of Defense said Thursday that Britain's donated weapons can be used by Ukrainian forces in operations on Russian territory, but restrictions on the use of long-range Storm Shadow missiles remain. You're listening to Flashpoint from the Voice of America. I'm Lori London in Washington. The World Health Organization declared Wednesday that the increasing spread of Mpox in Africa is a global health emergency, warning the virus might ultimately spill across international borders. Joining us to learn more is Dr. William Schaffner, professor of medicine at Vanderbilt University Medical Center's Division of Infectious Diseases. Thank you so much for being with us. Just let's start with the basics. What is Mpox? Previously referred to as monkeypox.
Mpox is a virus that comes in two strains. One, the milder one, that's the one the England, Canada, United States experienced a couple of 3 years ago, but now there's another strain. It's a much more serious strain. It's more contagious, and it's more apt to cause serious disease. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, they've had an explosion of these cases, probably over 15,000, probably many more than that, since the beginning of the year, with over 450 deaths associated with this virus. So it's highly transmissible. It can spread to people through close personal contact, and there may be even an element of respiratory spread, so you don't even have to touch the other person. That's how contagious this is. And, of course, in addition to the headache, fever, chills, feeling poorly, you get this very distinctive rash, these blisters that occur all over your body that are pus-filled. And this illness can be, particularly in older, more vulnerable, frail people, cause death.
Is this similar in contagion to what we experienced with the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, in the coronavirus pandemic, that was clearly respiratory spread and airborne spread. So that's the most contagious sort of infection that you can have. This one is not quite that contagious, but it still spreads very readily through close personal contact. It doesn't require sexual intimacy as the previous monkeypox outbreak did. And there is some thought that there may be some close-in respiratory spread also contributing to its contagiousness.
So what does it mean when the World Health Organization declares something like this a global public health emergency?
Yeah, so what's happened is this was originally confined to the Democratic Republic of Congo, but now has spread in a regional fashion to 15 other countries in that region. And the potential is for someone or many people to become infected while they're in one of these countries and then export it to any other part of the world. And when that situation occurs, that's when the World Health Organization calls attention to it and refers to it as a public health emergency of global importance.
How concerning do you think this is at this point?
It's of very real concern because remember, the previous outbreak of monkeypox that we had, not as contagious, requiring really close, personal, intimate contact, person to person, that spread to many countries of the world and initiated a large outbreak in Europe and, of course, also in the United States, focused principally on men who had sex with men. This is much more democratic, if you will. It can spread not only among men, but women and even also to children because it's much more contagious and doesn't require that sort of intimate personal contact.
And, you know, when we were dealing with the COVID pandemic, there were concerns that somebody could be walking around with it with no symptoms and spreading it. And that was a major worry for that particular virus. Is this sort of the same, that you can be affected but not have symptoms immediately or at all?
Well, most viral diseases become infectious probably the day before, at least, before you actually evidence symptoms. And that, of course, contributes to its ready spread. Now, there are data to suggest from the previous outbreak that something along those lines could also happen with Mpox. And given that this strain is even more contagious, I think it is likely that there is some pre-symptomatic spread. That is, the day before you actually become ill yourself, you're able to transmit the virus to others. So just looking at a person won't be able to tell you whether they are contagious. It's very sneaky that way.
Do you think there's a real possibility that this is already spread out of the African continent?
I think it's difficult to imagine that this will not create at least some introductions into other parts of the world. And of course, that's exactly why the World Health Organization has called it a matter of global health emergency, not just regional.
Is there a treatment? Is there a vaccine?
Well, first of all, prevention is always better than treatment. And yes, there is a vaccine available, and we used it very effectively in our previous Mpox outbreak. However, the amount of vaccine available is still very, very limited. The World Health Organization, and we in the United States are participating in this, are trying to get more vaccine into Africa. The more we can prevent there, the less chance there is of exportation. But there's one manufacturer of this vaccine. They're working overtime, and we wish we could quadruple at least the amount of vaccine that they're producing. So vaccine, yes, is available. And yes, for people who are seriously infected, there is a medication that we can give that reduces the severity of the illness. But once again, that's limited. And so at the moment, we have our capacity is limited as to what we can do regarding this virus.
Thank you so much. It's always good to talk to you.
My pleasure.
Dr. William Schaffner, professor of medicine at Vanderbilt University Medical Center's Division of Infectious Diseases. And meanwhile, just following that conversation, Sweden's public health agency on Thursday reported the first case of the more contagious Mpox outside of the African continent. Almost 500 million children live in areas experiencing at least twice as many extremely hot days as their grandparents did, according to a new United Nations Children's Fund analysis. Globally, children in West and Central Africa face the highest exposure to extremely hot days and the most significant increases over time, according to the analysis. Reuters correspondent David Doyle has this report.
Africa is heating up at a faster rate than the rest of the world. That's according to a joint UN-African Union report last year that said the continent is also enduring more severe climate and weather disasters, such as droughts. West Africa in particular has faced unprecedented heat. In April, temperatures in Mali hit 48.5 degrees Celsius, or 119.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Multiple countries in the region experienced temperatures well above 40 Celsius or 104 Fahrenheit. Climate scientists have warned that extreme heat waves could become more frequent without significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions.
That was David Doyle with Reuters reporting. In Latin America and the Caribbean, almost 48 million children live in areas experiencing twice the number of extremely hot days. While extreme heat is increasing in every country worldwide, the analysis shows that children are also exposed to more severe, longer, and frequent heat waves. And finally today, deep inside the urban jungle of Sao Paulo, Brazil's largest metropolis, residents of Yaragua indigenous territory in Sao Paulo continue their fight to get the Brazilian government to recognize the piece of territory as their own protected land. As Jan Boychat reports from Sao Paulo, it's more than a battle over land. It's a fight to keep their culture and traditions alive against the threat of modern urban sprawl.
In this little island of nature, in the middle of an ocean of houses and buildings, almost 1,000 members of the Guarani people try to preserve the culture and ancestral way of life. Maria Guarani is a tribal leader. She says, "The city swallowed us, the city embraced us, and it changed a lot." She says it greatly changed her culture, and she and others must live with the city residents today. She says they must live with both cultures so that they do not let the roots of the Guarani people, the indigenous people, die.
A cidade nos engoliu, né? Nos abraçou, nós está espremendo.
The city swallowed us. The city embraced us, and it changed a lot.
Maria is the leader of one of the 7 tribes living in the Jaraguá indigenous land, an indigenous area of more than 500 hectares in the northern part of São Paulo. In addition to dealing with the challenges of maintaining an ancestral culture, Maria and other indigenous leaders must contend with constant invasions of their territory in the form of construction by non-indigenous city residents and public projects. Neuza Poti, another tribal leader, says there are many invaders in the territory.
Tem bastante invasores.
There are many invaders in the territory, and when we came here to reclaim it, they came and fought as if we were invading their area. But it's the opposite. We know this, they know this, but even so, there is conflict.
Invadindo a área deles, mas que é ao contrário.
Poti is the youngest leader here. Not long ago, she came to this region of the territory to form her own village. Here, she also faces the challenges of keeping indigenous culture alive in a modern world that is increasingly present in her community. She says we really want this generation to continue with the indigenous people's language, its culture, and its way of life. Only a small fraction of the Guarani land in São Paulo has been recognized by the federal government as indigenous. But the fight continues, and the tribal leaders say they believe the government will recognize more land as theirs in coming years. But there is less hope that the threats to their culture will stop as the city that surrounds them keeps growing. Ian Buecha, VOA News, São Paulo.
And that does it for today's program. There's more VOA coverage 24 hours a day on our website, voanews.com, and across our social media platforms. On behalf of everyone here at VOA, we thank you so much for listening. Until tomorrow, I'm Lori London.
For deeper dives and expert analysis, listen to VOA Podcasts. Issues in the News explores the biggest stories every weekend, while International Edition keeps you informed every weekday. Plus, with a 5-minute newscast at the top of every hour, you're always up to date.